Next on our agenda, we have Alicia Nichols. Alicia is an international trade and development consultant. She is based in Barbados. She has several accolades attached to her name, but if you're active on platforms such as LinkedIn, I did encourage you earlier on to follow us at ICAC. Alicia produces the Caribbean trade law and development blog. And it's one of those that I actually follow and gain from. So, Alicia, we want to thank you for that. Some time ago, at the start of the pandemic, she did an article that spoke to COVID and businesses, reflection, impact, and options. And our ask of her was to present to us an updated version of that 2 years into what has now become our new reality. So, without further ado, Alicia, we pass it over to you and we look forward to benefiting from your updated sharing.
Thank you so much, Renata, and good morning to everyone. It certainly is an absolute pleasure to be able to join you all virtually and to speak to you this morning. So thank you again for the kind invitation to be here. And thank you to the audience for joining, and to the previous speaker, Dr. Ram, who so eloquently and comprehensively painted the macroeconomic situation facing the region and the world globally. And it's a very sobering situation for our firms. My pleasant task this morning is to discuss and reflect on the micro and firm level situation 2.5 years into the pandemic, as Renata would have mentioned. How have our businesses fared, especially in light of needed government measures aimed at tackling the pandemic, and how have they pivoted? And how can they continue to adapt to this new normal that we confront? First slide, please. I'm not too sure if you're seeing my slides. Okay, thank you. Perfect. So this is not my dog. I'm actually partial to cats, but I think his face sums up what a lot of us have been feeling over the past 2.5 years. Firms have had to do a lot of adjustment, and it has just been a rough couple of years. And so there's been the need to build resilience among a growing list of global disruptions. So as accountants and finance professionals, from SMEs to multi-million-dollar companies, you guys have seen the numbers firsthand. You know how the pandemic has affected the bottom lines of the businesses and clients that you advise daily. And you know that not all firms have been impacted the same way. But before we get to that, I just want to set the context a bit. So what you see here on the screen is just some data that I had pulled from the WHO's database, their dashboard. So I would have focused specifically on those countries which are CARICOM countries. And we know that the first case of COVID-19 happened in Wuhan, China, and then it finally reached the region in March 2020. And since then, there have been over 750,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases in the CARICOM region and 13,400 confirmed deaths in the CARICOM region. And my deepest condolences to anyone who has lost a family member as a result, or friend as a result of that. So there were, of course, knock-on effects. Global supply chain disruptions because of lockdowns and other measures which impacted activity at major ports, and rising commodity prices. And of course, climate change doesn't stop because of COVID. So in addition to COVID, some of us would have been impacted by weather events. In the case of Barbados, we had the ashfall. First time we had that amount of ashfall in many, many years, coming from the volcano in St. Vincent. So what you see here on the screen is just the business impact of some of the COVID-19 measures that governments would have put in place. And this is taken from an IDB study, very good study that was done by Acevedo et al. From IDB in 2021, where they looked at the impact of COVID-19 on businesses. And they also had this very good graphic which talked about the COVID-19 impact on firms of measures. But before I get to that, I just want to mention the fact that governments had a very delicate measure to maintain of taking measures that flatten the curve, but also to reduce hospitalization, but also with the knowledge that these measures would hurt businesses and the ordinary person. So our policymakers had tough decisions to make. So at various stages, there were lockdowns, there were curfews, stay-at-home orders, travel restrictions, temporary border closures. And this was particularly so in the first wave of the virus, when everybody was trying to figure out what on earth is going on, how are we going to manage this thing, and before there was any effective vaccine. And of course, a lot of these measures would have been very tough for countries to take and for our businesses to handle, especially in countries which are tourism oriented countries. So things like shutting down borders and whatnot would have had a major impact on businesses. Again, we're going to get to that shortly, but I'm just giving a broad overview before I get into that. And then, of course, there were protocols around social distancing, limits on certain activities. Many of our countries were forced to cancel our annual carnivals and festivals. So a lot of businesses that would have provided inputs to like band leaders and stuff like that, they of course would have suffered because of those things. And then, save for some exemptions, most Caribbean countries avoided vaccine mandates and took a more persuasive approach to vaccine uptake. So these measures, as I said, don't necessarily for public health impacted firms, as you can see in the slide here. So Acevedo et al., who actually came up with this, this was one of the charts in their study, saw a positive correlation between social distancing policies and the proportion of firms reporting a drop in sales. And they found that this pattern was replicated across the world, but the correlation seemed to be stronger for Caribbean countries. And so I put a link there. I think the slides will be made available to you, so you can always check out. It's a very interesting study. So 2 years into the pandemic, we've had a good set of data from the World Bank's Enterprise Survey and its COVID-19 Business Pulse Survey on how firms have been impacted globally. So the World Bank had analyzed over 120,000 firms in over 60 countries, and they found that on average, company sales dropped 27% in October 2020 to January 2021 from pre-pandemic levels. And this is after plunging 45% in April to September. And globally, those businesses which were in high contact sectors, such as tourism, hospitality, entertainment, and retail, were among the most impacted, especially due to the tourism shortfall and social distancing requirements. And SMEs, as was expected, generally were the firms most impacted. And even some of our largest firms here in the Caribbean, in a global context, will still be considered SMEs. And another interesting statistic was that women-led firms tended to be more negatively impacted. And that's not because of any deficiency with women leaders or anything like that. It's just that it has been empirically proven that women-led or owned businesses tend to face a lot more challenges than male-led or owned businesses, especially when it comes to things like accessing finance, etc. So with respect to the Caribbean now, more than 90% of Caribbean firms surveyed reported a negative impact and a 33% on average reduction in sales. And again, this is from the IDB study. And they found that firms in the category known as services and retail reported the largest decrease in sales and capacity utilization. And the three most common impacts were lower sales, which was 89% of the firms, lower capacity utilization, and a reduced workforce. And there've, of course, been similar studies that have been done in other. But because we're trying to build a more complete picture here, let me not make it seem as though all businesses had issues, because in fact, there were some companies that actually did well. And this is particularly evident when you look at an international perspective. This article from the Financial Times, I took the data from there, found that there were some companies that actually did very well during COVID-19. So your Apples, your Microsofts, Alphabet, Tesla, you will see that I put an asterisk there because those of you who I know probably will be following international business news and whatnot know that Tesla's market value has declined, particularly in light of the whole Twitter fiasco. But they were one of the winners as January 2022 from COVID-19, and of course, Amazon. So in all, in many cases, businesses would have been forced to not only deal with things that they were dealing with pre-pandemic, which would have been inadequately educated workforce, which Dr. Ram would have touched on a bit in his presentation, where he talked about the fact that, you know, there are some deficiencies in terms of numeracy and, you know, language, etc., in addition to other things. So that is a challenge that firms had to face pre-COVID and continue to face post-COVID. Then things like access to digital payments, which not so much was that big of a issue for firms, most of them didn't really engage in digital payments. But certainly after COVID, and I use post-COVID here tongue-in-cheek because we're still in COVID, albeit appearing to be past the worst, let's hope. Things like electricity, the macroeconomic environment, telecommunications, of course, will become a lot more important now because we're doing a lot more things online. People are working remotely. And then you have the other things like crime and theft, access to finance, etc. So all of that to say that a lot of the issues that firms are facing existed before COVID, and in some cases, COVID has exacerbated them. So just to summarize with regard to the business impact before we turn to how governments, how businesses adapted, is the differentiated firm impacts. The large tech companies and pharmaceutical M&Es market value, but not all did. Businesses in high contact sectors most negatively affected. And as I would have mentioned before, it seems as though women-led firms were more negatively impacted than male-led firms because of some of the inherent vulnerabilities that women-led firms have to face. So one of the things about businesses is that they learn how to adapt and to be agile and to pivot. And so our businesses did not roll over and play dead. They found ways in which to adapt. And businesses had to do a lot of soul searching and hunkering down, and in some cases, belt tightening in order to respond to the challenges. And like with everything, the fundamentals of some leadership, teamwork, evidence-based business planning were key to help those businesses weather the storm. And those that were able to adapt, especially through the use of technology, were among those which were better able to manage the COVID rough seas. So some of the things they did, as we all know, is that they implemented firm-specific COVID-19 protocols. So, you know, we know in our supermarkets, we see the little things there, the social distance markers there. You have the sanitation stations. Of course, while doing that, that also increases the cost to these businesses because now you have to incur additional costs in order to ensure that you have an even safer working environment and environment for your clients. So in addition to reduce sales, in many cases, businesses also had to incur increasing costs. So businesses also implemented work from possible. They look for new clients and markets. So I don't know if anybody is here from JAMPRO, but I had read that JAMPRO, which is the Jamaican Export and Investment Promotion Agency, was able to find new markets for Jamaica mango exporters, for instance. and the export promotion agencies of many of our countries have definitely been a lot more aggressive in terms of trying to find new markets for our exporting firms. In some cases, businesses had to source from newer suppliers because remember, as I said earlier, there were some countries that implemented trade restrictive measures, which would have restricted or completely banned the export of certain PPE like masks and certain medical equipment and whatnot. So in some cases, firms had to look for new suppliers outside of those countries, outside the firms in those countries. And then, of course, in some cases, they had to do it because of supply chain disruptions or because the supplier that they once used implemented tougher payment terms. So they had to turn to suppliers which provided better payment terms. And they also developed new goods and services. So some businesses started up to cater to new areas of demand. So I could here, for instance, like We Fetch, which specialize in pickup and delivery. And then there's some businesses that added delivery service. So those of you who are from Barbados would know that for many years, one of our largest fast food restaurants did not offer delivery service, but because of the exigencies of COVID, they ended up having to offer delivery service. I know they even deliver ice cream, you know, their own ice cream that they make as well. So businesses have pivoted. And what a lot of businesses have also done is in terms of through the greater use of technology. So I will give you an example. One of my favorite restaurants, when I went to for my birthday last year, and I asked the lady for the menu, she was like, no, use your phone, it's on. Well, she didn't say it like that, but you get what I mean. She was like, no, we don't offer the physical menus anymore. You could use the QR code on the table, use your phone to scan it, and then you could see the menu, which I thought was very fascinating, a very good use of technology, because it means that you don't have to be relying on the menu that somebody else used. And it also saves them in terms of cost, because then they don't have to be sanitizing the menus all the time in between customers. So, and then they also change working modalities, the greater use of working from home. Some downsize their physical plant because naturally, if you don't have that many people in your offices anymore, then you might want to go to smaller working arrangements. Some deferred investment, and then unfortunately, some had to lay off staff, whether it's short time. And this was particularly more so in the hospitality industry, and those are the high contact sectors which would have been more affected by social distancing requirements, curfews, etc. So how have governments responded? And this is important because it lets you know that there is support out there for businesses to an extent which we will get to shortly. But cognizant of the fact that many of the measures that they would have put in place would have, of course, been detrimental to businesses, governments, to the extent that they could, and Dr. Ram very eloquently spoke about the very limited fiscal space that a lot of our countries faced. So there was not a lot of real wiggle room to be able to give like very extensive compensation and grants like you will probably get in a bigger country. But to the extent that they could, many of our governments pass, well, for the want of a better term, like stimulus packages, so to speak, or business support measures to assist businesses. So things like grants, deferral of taxes, debt forgiveness, concessional loans and grants, temporary loan moratoria, encouraging the financial institutions to provide these things. After the second lockdown in Barbados, the government offered compensation to those businesses who could prove that they were negatively impacted by the lockdown. They also offered training opportunities for businesses in order to help build capacity, but also to persons who were laid off in order to help them to be able to manage. And then, of course, establishing special committees with regard to businesses to help them. But there's a catch here, because informality, which is businesses that operate in the informal sector that are not registered, that don't pay taxes, etc., they did not qualify for these support measures. So of course, there are lots of businesses which would have been negatively impacted, but obviously would not have been able to access these measures because they weren't able to show a certificate of incorporation, registration documents, financial statements for the past few years, etc. And if there's one key lesson I think coming out of this is that our governments have to make it easier for businesses to formalize, because behind every business is a person or persons with families to feed and support. And where business fails, that's at least one person who has lost income and the ability to support himself or herself. So wrapping up, because I see that the time is drawing nigh, adapting to the new normal. So we have to learn how to live with COVID. Yes, we appear to be on the tail end of this disease, but this pandemic, but at the end of the day, it is likely to continue for a while, given the amount of variants that are coming out, etc. So we have to not only bear that in mind, we have to bear in mind the geopolitical tensions, the economic issues that we're facing. So how can businesses deal with this? Innovate. And I know it sounds cliche, and I know sometimes we roll our eyes when we keep hearing this word, but it is important. Greater spending on R&D, market research are important. Leveraging technology, especially to improve your day-to-day performance, operations, and customer experience. Use the business support assistance available by the government or any other entity. Some of the entities like IDB, etc., provide certain programs. UNDP, there was one I was hearing about on the radio early today. I can't remember the name, but they provide certain programs and support for businesses in certain areas. So definitely have a dedicated person on staff who is always out there looking out for what are some of these business support opportunities and assistance that could be beneficial for your business. New product and service offerings to meet new demand. So as Dr. Ram would have indicated, and we all know that there is a major food security issue right now because of this whole Russia-Ukraine crisis. What are some of the ways in which businesses could pivot in order to provide more food stuff to the region? We heard recently that the price of wheat has gone up, so therefore the price of flour is going up. Is it that we need to pivot more and offer more non-wheat wheat flour products, so things like breadfruit flour, etc. These are things that are already on the market, but maybe it is that firms need to offer more of this. Relooking working modalities. So in the UK, I heard on BBC a couple days ago, they're looking into 4-day work weeks to see whether it increases productivity. And there are several firms there which are on board with that. Increasing cybersecurity. A lot of companies skimp on this, but unfortunately to their detriment. So things like hacks, malware, data breaches, all of these things not only put the security of your company at risk, but they also reduces client confidence in your ability to keep their information confidential, right? So please don't skimp on cybersecurity. And managing your risks, whether it's insurance, whether it's updating or implementing your business continuity, updating your business continuity plans, etc. Always make sure that you manage your risks. In terms of supply chain resilience, sourcing locally and regionally is now of a greater imperative. And then businesses must go on, but you still must protect the health of employees, clients, and customers. We must improve our data culture. So I know many businesses don't like to share data, But the truth is, this data is how evidence-based policy making is made. Governments cannot offer support or proper support unless they have the data on which to tailor their programs, their support programs. So please share data, whether it's with government researchers or academic researchers who are coming to you. I know that a lot of you have survey fatigue, but the reason why we do this is because we need to ensure that what recommendations we make are policy based. So to wrap up, and of course, greater business academic linkages such as internships, partnerships to ensure graduates are workforce ready and to assist businesses with research. So in closing, COVID-19 has been a significant challenge for businesses both regionally and globally. Not all businesses have been impacted the same way, but businesses have found ways to adapt. The fundamentals such as strong and prudent leadership, business planning, teamwork will always be important. And those which have the greatest capacity to incorporate technology into their day-to-day work and to improve the customer experience appear to be the ones who were much better able to weather the crisis. Thank you for your kind attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for another very comprehensive presentation. And of course, we thank you for your time. I have a question that's a little bit more trade related. I know trade is your baby, although we've asked you to speak on COVID and businesses here today. Do we as a region need to rethink international trade?
Oh, yes, most definitely. I think that, to be honest, I think we know what we are supposed to do. We know we are supposed to continue to diversify our economies. We know we're supposed to increase our innovation. We know we're supposed to try to improve our relations, our business facilitation, etc. I think, though, that there are many reasons why sometimes it's difficult for us to make changes. I think in many cases, because of the fiscal situation, we just don't have the room in which to provide support to our businesses. And I think also sometimes we get a bit too comfortable with the status quo. But I do think that there are ways in which we have to improve, and I think there are ways in which we are improving. So Barbados, for instance, recently has expanded its diplomatic footprint, as you know. So we just recently opened the embassy there in Kenya, and then I was just in the International Business Update seminar before I joined, and they were talking about new bilateral investment treaties, with other countries. So I think we know what we have to do. We have to do it a little quicker.
We hear you, and I guess the one thing that we don't have on our side is time. There's definitely a need to move with some sense of purpose and swiftness. You mentioned something a few times that concerned me. You said that the firms that were female-led, or the businesses that were female-led, were impacted more than others. The accounting profession, if we were to look at the statistics, is female-dominated. We welcome our male colleagues, but it is a very female-dominated profession still. Any further comments about that impact and why?
Sure, and the thing is that, and that's why I try to make sure that I reiterated that it isn't because of anything with regard to the female's ability to lead. In fact, a lot of studies say that female leaders tend to be a lot more effective. The problem is that there are many structural barriers that women face that male firms don't always face. So things like being able to access finance, even things like caregiving, those women with children find it, challenging to both manage a business and to care for children, especially if it's just the woman by herself. So women are called on to do a lot more tasks and face a lot more barriers. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the empirical data shows that female-led businesses tend to be a lot more severely impacted by COVID and by some of these other shocks than male-owned firms because of these structural barriers that female firms face. I hope that clarifies.
You did. Thank you so very much. And Lisa, we want to thank you very much for the time that you have given to us and the thoughts and information that has been shared. And it will be remiss of me to share with our wider audience how you and I met. And that was several years ago while you were on your way to ICAC conference. That was a year was being hosted in Belize, and we happened to sit next to each other on that flight and became travel buddies then. And it has been an absolute pleasure to see your own evolution within your chosen profession.
Thank you so much, Renata, and it has indeed been a pleasure.
Thank you so very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a time where you have an opportunity to network with each other on the Woover app. The ability to join a room is very much there. And of course, we encourage you again to visit the booths of our sponsors. Our sponsors, Platinum sponsor EY, our Silver sponsor, CPA Canada. Thank you so very much. And we will see you back promptly at 11:10 a.m. Thank you. A reminder from our other sponsor, the Barbados International Business Association. They are offering and issuing a very early invite for you to attend the Barbados Risk and Insurance Management Conference 2023. That conference would be held in Barbados, and a save the date has been issued March 23rd and 24th. Enjoy your break.